Hello, everyone. My name is Armando Perez-Carreno, and welcome to the Web Talk Show. Today with us is Kerry Averyt from the Canyon Regional Water Authority. How are you, Kerry?
Very well, thank you. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. I want to talk about what it is exactly that the Canyon Regional Water Authority does. So I'll let you give a brief introduction as to what it is and then also how you got to be there because I find it very interesting and I think our listeners will get a kick out of knowing what happens behind the scenes.
Okay. So the Canyon Regional Water Authority was formed in 1989, and we're a political subdivision of the state. So I guess we're quasi-governmental. Um, we have 11 member entities, and we sell water wholesale to those entities. We acquire water rights. We have two surface water treatment plants, one in New Braunfels, one in San Marcos, and then we have one plant that treats groundwater east of San Antonio. We take that raw water, we treat it to drinking water standards, and then we sell it to our member entities wholesale, who then sell it to their retail customers. Our member entities range from nearly halfway to Houston, east of San Antonio, along the I-10 corridor,
Mhm.
all the way up to east of Austin. So a wide range among our member entities. Um, and then we also have one just wholesale customer who's actually not a member. I have a board of trustees made up of 22 seats. Each member entity has two seats on that board, and I'm the general manager. And my duties are to run the day-to-day operations of Canyon Regional.
Wow. How did you get into this?
So by trade, I'm an engineer, a civil engineer, and I focused on water resources. I've been practicing engineering around 25 years now. Um, and it's just kind of through my experience. I've worked for various public agencies, worked on some pretty large projects, water and wastewater. And I was just contacted one day to see if I was interested in taking this position. General manager is not something that I ever really aspired to be. But this is a smaller organization in terms of staff and what we do. So I'm still able to stay at the ground level and be, more involved, not necessarily hands-on, but at least more involved in the day-to-day activities.
Wow. So civil engineering. Now, this part, do you still do you go to the plants and actually walk them and are you part of the actual building process of new ones, etc., or are you mostly now in the managerial part of it?
Mostly managerial. I love to go out to the facilities anytime I can.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I'm just can't find a lot of time to do so. But,
That makes
you know,
that
I
makes sense.
I, in earlier in life, I did a lot of construction and I enjoy being out in the field. So any opportunity I get, I take it.
But yeah, I can imagine I would be the same way. Is the water treatment the same for groundwater versus other types?
Uh, there's some similarities and some differences. There are several different processes that you can use to treat the water and clean it up. In our case, we do use different processes. For our surface water, we use membranes is the primary process that removes all the contaminants. Whereas at our groundwater treatment plant, we use sand filters, much like the same sand filters you might see at a swimming pool.
Mm.
Those just run by gravity. So, it just depends on the quality of the water and what you need to remove from the water. You determine the best process to do that.
So groundwater, I remember going to the caverns, right? And then they had, I don't know if we were touring or we were going to one of those concerts, but they, at some point, they had some water there and they have some devices. They were measuring things like that. And that got me curious. What I was asking. So I see in that area, that the general area, if you are looking to buy land or a house on a plot of land, there many of those places have access to groundwater. So when
Yes.
someone has access to that, do they have to have their water treated by a third party? Do they do it themselves? Like, how does that work?
For private wells, they typically treat the water themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually, pretty simplistic system
Mm-hmm.
that they can buy to treat the water. It's usually kind of almost like a water softener where you just buy it and have it installed. A little bit more to it for the groundwater treatment, but not a really complex or complicated system to own and operate.
Hmm.
Um,
S-
now, and it just depends on the groundwater. There's brackish groundwater that takes a lot more treatment. Most of the privately owned wells that you see are actually from a freshwater aquifer.
Ah. And when you say brackish, can you explain that in non technical terms
Um,
for us
it just
mortals?
basically it means it's salt water,
Mm-hmm.
much the same as seawater, although the concentration or the salinity isn't nearly as high.
Hmm.
And so you have marine desalination, and then you have brackish groundwater desalination.
Really? Okay. So when you talk about groundwater, so you acquire water rights.
Yes.
This in the bigger scope of things, right? And then that water gets pumped out via
Yes.
pipes.
So
They were taken to a facility. How does that part work?
yeah, you're absolutely right. So we have a well field, several wells um, that draw the water up and push it to a treatment facility from there. And we have tanks that we store raw water in and treated water. And then from there, we have pump stations that pump it through distribution pipelines to our member entities. Each one has take points along that distribution pipeline.
Oh, there's a distribution pipeline. So it's not like you
Yes.
take truckloads. It's that there's actually a pipeline that goes to the different
Yes.
places and that it just continuously flows.
Yeah, yeah. There's a pretty vast network of pipelines for us because it covers such a long, range. And then, each member they'll take it from their draw points and distribute it out to their retail customers.
The water that they get is already treated.
That's correct. Yes.
So it's just like just water that they use for their users.
Yes, that's correct. Just residences, commercial. Some of them have industrial users. So, it varies. But they'll have their own storage facilities so they can store the water and their own pump stations. And then they'll often have their own treatment facility on site because you have to maintain a minimum chlorine residual in the water. And so if it's, depending on how long it's stored or in the system, they'll have to boost that chlorine at some point.
Interesting. So they get the water and then they don't necessarily distribute it all as it comes in. They might have some that's stored, distributed, and then based on what requirements of use, that's how they're moving it.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And right now, there's so much growth in the area that we're working with the member entities because our infrastructure is really strained.
Mm.
For them to be able to keep up with growth and for us to be able to keep up with their demands, it's really a struggle. And it's all, taking all those components and making them work together. You have the ground storage tanks, and then you also have the elevated storage tanks that maintain the pressure in the system. And so it's right now it's very challenging to make sure we're meeting all the needs.
Well, yeah, I bet. Especially when there's not a lot of rain and like you said, with all the growth.
Yeah. Yeah, the growth combined with the unprecedented drought in this region is really a cause of concern right now. And so our industry is really scrambling to figure out how to develop new water supplies and be able to keep up with the growth and the increased demand.
Hmm. When we hear about water, a lot of times we immediately think of lakes or some other type of reservoir, but I hadn't thought of groundwater being used as something that's widely available in the sense that not like just for a property, but like you're saying, for distribution to multiple entities across a vast area.
Yeah, and it's a groundwater is a sensitive topic right now,
Hmm.
because you have the, concentrated populations, and so the water purveyors are having to go further and further out to find new sources of water. There really aren't any new sources of groundwater. So the only new sources are either, I mean, of surface water. So the only new sources are either groundwater or ocean water.
Mm-hmm.
And groundwater is right now the least expensive to develop, and so that's what everybody's looking at. However, in these rural areas, there's some pushback. The public in these areas want to make sure that they're not losing their water and
Hmm.
that their wells aren't going dry. And so it's really it's very critical in the industry right now that we find a way to work together, and make sure everybody has enough water.
That makes a lot of sense. How does someone know? Is there a way to know that, let's say someone has a well on their property, but then three properties down, someone else has also a well, but they decide to work with a company that treats it, etc., and they send it out. Is there a way to accurately map whether one well affects another well, or are they all from the same sort of source? How does that work?
There is a way. So there are hydrogeologists, and it's a very specialized field, where they can create groundwater models, and they can, look at the conditions, and they have monitoring wells they can use, and they measure drawdown, and they're very, it's very predictive, and it's a lot of data goes in, and like any other model, the more data you put in, the better your results. So that's something that they're continually updating. The state formed groundwater districts some time back to help regulate the use of the groundwater. And so they employ hydrogeologists, as well as like a water authority like myself, other water purveyors. They also use hydrogeologists because what we don't want to do is run anybody else out of water. We need to bring water in, but not to the detriment of others.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now it's just very, as I said, sensitive. There's a lot of misunderstanding, and
Mm-hmm.
we're working together to you know to make sure that we get water in everybody's home. I
Yes.
consider that to be one of the most important jobs on earth right now.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
no
we
one
have.
can live without water. So
Yes, yes. We can't live without water, and you don't realize it until there's a lack of it,
yes,
and there's a
I
lot of
believe it was.
waste.
I believe it was Benjamin Franklin said, "We know the worth of water when the well runs dry." And right now, that's becoming a reality, and that we have to make sure that we keep in check, and we don't want to cause that.
Is water regulated like at a state level? Is that something that's just within state lines? Do some companies move water between state lines? How does all that work?
Uh, it's there's a lot of politics involved, but basically, the groundwater belongs to the people.
Hmm.
Whoever owns the land owns the water underneath. What the groundwater district regulates is how much water is available under your piece of land, and that can fluctuate. They can update their model and make some adjustments there, and that can also vary from one county to the next. The districts don't necessarily follow county lines, but to some degree they do.
Mm-hmm.
And in one county, you might have 2 acre-feet per acre, and in the next county, you only have 1 acre-foot per acre. Um, so it is regulated, but each groundwater district has their own set of rules and governing parameters that they go by. Um, so it's
Interesting.
very interesting. Now, surface water belongs to the state.
Oh,
And there are, there are, river authorities that control those waters. Um, Now there is one exception I know of here, the Edwards Aquifer, the largest one in this area. That is actually under federal jurisdiction. There's the Edwards Aquifer Authority that was formed, I believe, in the '90s. That is actually on a federal level that is governed.
what can you describe an aquifer? What is it exactly? Because we see the signs everywhere here in town. It's like, oh, like Edwards Aquifer, start of Edwards Aquifer, right? And like
Yeah.
discharge zone, and like there's these signs, but if you don't know anything about it, you're like, what? What is that?
Well, and it's just a pocket of water where somewhere below there's a restrictive layer that keeps it from going. And I want to qualify that I don't have a lot of credentials with groundwater here at all. I mean, I have a knowledge, and I'm learning more now that I'm in this area. But um, it's just a pocket of water, and it's layered like the Edwards Aquifer is in limestone formations where it's stored in the pores of the limestone. The Carrizo Aquifer is another very large one. That's the sand aquifer, where the water is just perched in there, and you drill down to a certain level and draw it out. Um, and then in some cases, there are aquifers that are layered on each other. Like you might hear the Carrizo Wilcox. So the Carrizo is fresh water, and then the Wilcox is salt water, and they're layered on one on top of the other, but in the
Really?
same, a lot of the same path, same footprint.
Wow. And how extensive are they? Like, are they a few
I believe
miles?
yeah, the Carrizo starts in Louisiana and goes down, I believe, all the way down south to you know, at some point, I'm sure there's a barrier where it stops. Uh, the Edwards Aquifer, I believe, is 176 miles long. So they can be very vast and have a lot of users.
Wow. And so being a federal entity controlled aquifer, does that mean I expect it's regulated in a sense where you can't just drill into the ground and get some water?
Well, you do have to get a permit.
Mm.
Anytime you drill a well in the state of Texas, you have to get a permit from the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality, and it has to be registered. Um, More and more of the groundwater districts are requiring well owners to register their privately owned wells, because there are funds set up. And if the well is registered in that district, and their well goes dry because of large withdrawals elsewhere, sometimes they can use that mitigation fund to either lower the pump in their well or make it deeper.
Wow, that's good to know. So it's a good thing to register because you can get the benefit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it helps everyone because now you have more data, like you were saying, about who's
Certainly.
drawing where and when.
Yeah, it helps the groundwater district know, exactly what's being pulled out so they can adjust their model and make it the most accurate.
How much can people actually use, like if someone has their own private well, we've been talking about private wells a little bit, is there a restriction how much you can draw for yourself or and if it's different if you are like sort of selling to a third party as well?
Right. And so for our wells, which we call production wells, they're larger. They'll have like I say a 16-inch casing. I've been involved with wells at other agencies that had a 30-inch casing. Pretty big wells that can pull a lot of water. Um, but you have to get a permit to produce that water, and there will be a limit to the amount that you can pump, a rate that you can pump, and then a maximum amount per day that you can pump with that well. And it's related to the amount of drawdown a lot of times that you would cause in the surrounding area and the impact that you would have. And you want to make sure that that it can recover, and that you're not drawing it down so far that the whole area goes dry all of a sudden until the
Mm.
aquifer catches up with you. And so that's where you work with the groundwater district, and depending on how much water you're going to produce, you'll have multiple wells. We right now have 14 wells at that facility, and they're scattered out over several mile areas so that it's not all concentrated at one point.
And are they always pumping or is it staggered? How does that work?
It's staggered. They're not always pumping. It depends on the demands at that point. And to keep the well pump from going on and off all the time, or even like for pump stations where you're pushing water out into the system, that's where the storage tanks come in. So that the pumps aren't, off and on all the time. You put water in that tank, and when it gets to a certain level, then they pump on and fill the tank back up. and that's all
Oh.
connected through, communications, more commonly SCADA these days,
Hmm.
so that it's all communicating together.
Wow.
And then
Is
for
I
the
Yeah.
residential wells, those are typically considered exempt wells,
Mm.
meaning that they don't have to be you don't have to get a permit to drill them, and we're talking a well for a single family residence.
Hmm.
And they'll have limits as well, much lower, but, in some cases, it can be as much as, 25,000 gallons per day, which is, far more than the average family uses in a month.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. So you you have a limit, but not in the sense that, oh, I'm going to be limited in water, more in the don't take advantage of it and start selling it from your property, right?
Right, yeah, and then, we have, we're permitted to produce so many acre feet per year of water, and, regardless of, we can use it however we want as long as we don't exceed those rates, but at the end of the year, we can't exceed that amount.
Oh, okay. So I bet there's a lot of planning involved
Certainly,
in just
yes.
like figuring out from where you draw and at what times, and then how much you keep, and then how much you need to plan in advance so that you have enough to meet the quota but not go over it, but not to have less
Yeah,
than
you
you
don't
can.
wanna pay for water that you're not gonna need,
Hmm.
but you wanna make sure you have plenty for your customers. So,
Wow.
yeah, a lot of planning and looking at, future population growth and planning for the future. We're, on that scale, you're talking about, tens of thousands of acre feet of water that you have to acquire to meet your future needs. And so it's, as I said before, it's kind of challenging right now to find those new water supplies and to be able to afford the infrastructure to produce them.
Well, I expect it's very expensive. How do the pumping system work? Like, how do you get water from one of these locations all the way to miles and miles away? How does that system work?
Well, it's just, it's pipelines, just a
Mm-hmm.
network. The wells will push into the collection piping. Um, and, depending on how far that water has to go, sometimes you have to put in an additional booster station with a tank for, basically a relay station. In our case, we're not that far away, but some water pipelines can be, tens or even 100 miles long or more. The San Antonio water system, they have one pipeline that's 130 miles long, where they bring water down south to San Antonio.
Wow. And you talked about the high towers, the reservoirs, or
Uh-huh.
the ones that are high above. Those are used for pressure, you were saying?
Primarily, they maintain the pressure in the area that they're in, um, and they also, in times of emergency, they can provide water. Because
Hmm.
they'll have some water storage. The TCEQ requires a minimum number of gallons of storage per connection for that's tied to that tank. Um, and so that way, during outages, that provides a little bit more water and also maintains pressure in the
Hmm.
system.
And does every, I don't know, this little, is it the town or region have to have one of those? Because we see them as you're driving through towns, right? You always see them. Is that something that you need to have in order for the water system to work in that location?
Yeah, for a public water supply, yes. For private wells, no. There's another means. It's called a hydropneumatic tank, and it's a tank that's partially filled with water and also partially filled with air. And you put a compressor on there that will compress that air and put pressure in the tank to push the water out. Um, those can be used on a temporary measure for public water supplies, and of course they're much larger, but not for permanent use. At some point, you have to put in the elevated storage to maintain that pressure.
Interesting. And why do some places, especially in residential areas, have much lower pressure than others? Just because they might be far, or because there are many connections that spread out from one point? How does?
Sometimes, and it also has to do, especially in this area where we kind of have the rolling topography.
Mm-hmm.
kind of depends on where you're at in that pressure system. Um, and when you get in a city, like New Braunfels or San Marcos or San Antonio, where there's a lot of rolling topography, um, they'll have different pressure planes, and they're all
Mm-hmm.
separated basically by division valves to maintain their own pressure. But if you're at a low point in that pressure plane, then you're going to have higher pressure. But if you're at a much higher point, then your pressure is going to be less.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of the elevation because I've seen even very close by, like maybe 2 miles away, where one property has extreme pressure, like 110 or something, and if your pressure reducing valve doesn't work, you're breaking everything, right? Whereas somewhere that's very close by has like 40 psi, and
Yeah.
like right there.
Yeah. And in some areas, yeah, they have to put an additional pressure reducing valve on their service line if they're very low in that area. And then the water systems are required to maintain a minimum pressure in their system. If they fall below that pressure, that's when they have to put out a boil water notice, and they have to, disinfect, because you're at a very high risk for contamination entering your system.
Oh, and that's what happened in the freeze, right? When we had the freeze a few years ago, they sent that multiple times, right? Because the water pressure was low enough that this could happen.
Yeah, I believe you're right. There were some areas where they had to send out the boil water notice. That is not something that is good for a water company to send out,
Hmm.
even if it's through no fault of their own. If it's force majeure, you never want to have to send out a boil water notice. It's just not a good thing.
And is that because what makes it more likely to get contaminants? That instead of the water flowing, it's there's space for things to.
Yeah, there's the potential for water to enter the system. If there's not enough pressure pushing out, you're at a much higher risk of, if there's something as simple as a garden hose bib in somebody's front yard could potentially draw contaminants into the system that could get out into the main.
Oh, right. Because the main water is already
That's
cleaned
already,
and
yeah, that's
treated
clean.
like you do, and so it's assumed that the water in the pipes is always treated or clean. And
Right.
but if then something like this happens and you don't have those, what are they called? Are they like
The
check
backflow
valves?
preventer.
Backflow preventers,
Yes.
then the water can come in to the actual main and contaminate the rest of the water.
Yes. And once
Wow.
it gets in there, then you have to do very, you have to cast a wide net to make sure that you're capturing any of the potential, contaminated areas.
And is that what? How do they treat it? Do they add chlorine to the system, or they just have to
Yes.
wait for it to?
Yeah. They would, and I've never been directly involved in this, but you'd have to do a lot of sampling. And then if you actually find some contamination, then you would probably, when you put a new main into service, you do what's called superchlorination, and you put a very concentrated amount of chlorine in there to disinfect it, and then you flush it out. Um, if they detect any contaminants, they would have to perform that on that part of the system.
Wow. You mentioned that salt water is another possibility, but it's more expensive
Yes.
than groundwater. Why is that?
Uh, because it takes a lot more to treat it and remove the contaminants from the water. Um, and you also with saltwater desalination, you have a lot more waste stream, a lot more byproduct that's costly to mitigate. That's one of the environmental concerns with doing ocean water desalination is that waste stream, and if they discharge it back into the ocean, it can actually create a dead zone where nothing can live because it's just too concentrated.
Oh,
So,
so go
sorry, go
ahead.
ahead. Well, I was just gonna say that, also the energy costs, uh, are a lot higher for that type of
Hmm.
treatment, as opposed to regular, membranes. The most common process is reverse osmosis, and it's a lot more energy intensive to clean the water that way.
So it's viable. It's just expensive to do.
Yeah, and like most, things, it's an economy of scale.
Hmm.
As more and more, use of it, comes around, there'll be more efficient ways to treat the water. Um, I know there's some companies right now that are looking at zero liquid discharge, which from an environmental, perspective is a huge win, but also, from the cost, if they can figure out a way to make that efficient, then it'll save a lot of money in the long run. You know, water will never be too expensive to afford. Uh, we as an industry, like with any other infrastructure, the first question you ask is, can we afford it? And we have to get rid of that and start having this philosophy of we can't not afford it, because we have to have it.
Yes, that's very well put. The I think the problem lies in having it so readily available, and so it doesn't induce the need or the mental need to build new things because it's there, right?
Right,
Until
right.
you really need it, and in that case, then you start building things
That's
for it,
correct.
right? I
That is
remember
correct.
when I was a kid and I learned about reverse osmosis, I was like, oh, well, there can't be any more drought or anything because you could just do that. But then you don't really
Yeah,
think about everything else, like you were saying, the cost, the energy, transporting, and all that. Like it is still, yeah, it is a possibility, but
yeah.
it's not as easy as just boiling the water and and extracting it, right?
No. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest struggles also is just, financing this new infrastructure. Your average utility, they don't have the money on hand to pay for that. And so it's getting the funding, and then being able to set up a structure where you're able to finance the debt and be able to repay that debt over time. And, with rising costs, it's getting harder and harder to do that.
Who pays for all this? Like, if you see a company like Sauce, is Sauce part of the city itself? Is it a private company? Is it a semi-private company? Is it how do these entities work?
So the saws is they're under a charter. But they're part of the city of San Antonio, but they operate under separate charter. And so they ultimately their budget, high level decisions like that are approved by the city council.
Hmm.
And it varies. Several of my member entities are special utility districts, where that's all they do is water or perhaps wastewater and recycled water. Some are municipalities, where the municipality still owns and operates all of the water distribution network. So it varies, from entity to entity. There are some private water purveyors, and we're seeing a rise in firms that want to come in and just develop water supply and then sell it, and that's a for profit venture.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole different side of the coin now that we're seeing a rise in because the value of water is increasing.
That's interesting. How does that work? Because it's like I've seen like in Dallas and other cities, there's more than one electric company. Right? Like, how does that work? Especially with water, because I expect there's not a lot of pipes. It's like there's one source to get to the
Yeah.
homes. So how can something like that actually exist?
Well, now when it comes to sending the water out to the retail customers, they have what's called a CCN area, a Certificate of Convenience and Necessity. And basically it means, okay, it makes sense for you to serve these customers. And, when you have new customers in your CCN, you're basically you're required to provide that water service to them. And so you can't get that change without a legal action being taken as far as reducing or expanding your CCN. Some municipalities that are growing, their water companies, whether it be part of the city or a separate company, they have to apply to expand their CCN to meet the new customers' needs. Now the private ventures, I think, mostly are are looking at doing wholesale,
Mm,
uh, s- water as opposed to retail, where they would approach a company like Canyon Regional and say, "Hey, I'm developing this project. Do you want to buy water from me?" And they would just sell it to us at a rate, either treated or untreated, and then we would turn around and convey it to
uh,
our customers.
interesting. Yeah. So at a higher level, that's where it would happen.
Yeah.
That
Now, I don't
that
have any
makes a lot of
ventures like
sense.
that ongoing right now,
Yes.
but
Yes.
I just know that that's something that seems to be on the rise.
Interesting. Well, yeah, it makes sense if someone can find a better way or a cheaper way to do it and resell. At the end of the day, they're just
Yeah.
it's leverage, right? Interesting. Wow. What you mentioned a few times about how it's getting harder and harder to find water sources and there's scarcity, especially when there's drought. So, what what can people do to be mindful of this? Sometimes we get the notice and the things. I think like SAWS does. They send an email that says you're doing great, and they compare you to the
Yeah.
similar homes. I like that because it sort of gamifies it in a way where you're like, "Ooh, I did better this time," or I'm like completely worse than everyone else, or whatever. Right? You see that, and
Yeah.
it puts it in context. I think. Is there anything that you've seen that does work and sort of bring it down to earth to people's minds to see like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be running your hose just for fun or cleaning the
Yeah.
driveway or whatever.
And it's public outreach and raising the awareness, and, raising the awareness that something as simple as turning off the faucet while you're brushing your teeth, if everybody does that, that's has a really significant impact on reducing the water consumption. You know, Everybody likes to have a nice, pretty lawn. That's of course one of the biggest uses of water that we could reduce. And if we can get everybody to join in and just minimize that, I people like me, we don't really water our lawns. I might get out there a couple times a summer and do it by hand. But I don't expect everybody to let their lawn go brown. But I think if you do it responsibly, you can still be able to do it. Um, one of the most effective ways that I think is out there. Anytime you want the general public to subscribe to something new like that, conservation or recycling, what you do is you go to the schools, you go to the elementaries, and you get the
Mm.
children to subscribe, and they'll shame their parents into joining in.
That's a
It's
that's a good one. Yes.
yeah, it really, you have children, if your child comes home from school and says, "Hey, we gotta start conserving water," they'll make sure you do it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really actually very effective method to spread the word.
I'm glad you touched on that. It's a very good point. There's this book that our daughter got for Pipa the dog, from Sauce. And it's this little like a little comic book, if you can imagine, a little thing, and it tells the story of this dog, real life, that fell into one of the I don't know what the name of it is, but they one of the holes was open and it fell in because it was exploring, and so then the sauce team came and got her out with the little robot, right? So they sort of attracted him, and so but then they made this story, which is really neat because the dog falls in and then the robot comes and says like, "Hey, come here, it's okay," and then the dog's like, what is this sticking to my feet?" And then the robot's like, "Oh, it when oil is dropped through the drain, it then clogs. It turns into this sort of mush, and
Yeah.
that blocks our pipes, and then we have to come in and clean them because otherwise the water gets stuck, right?" And then, "Oh, what are these?" And then like, "Oh, wipes. If you throw wipes down the toilet, and they get stuck here, and they make these spirals. And so it explains it in a simple way. But then when I read that, I was like, oh, that's why you don't throw like some of the things that
Yeah.
right? Once it's explained like in a way for a child, sometimes it makes more sense. You're like, oh, I'm never gonna throw oil down the drain again, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great point. I think more people should do it, like even apart from the entities, now that so many people are being creative and creating these stories and books and things like that. Like if you can put in awareness into these in a way, like you were saying, that the
Yeah.
kids can then tell the parents, yeah, that's a great that's a great response.
Yeah, I've given a lot of presentations to school children ranging from elementary up actually to college classes, and yeah, it's interesting that the younger ones, that can be an effective tool to use when you want to, you know, spread the word to the public.
That's amazing. Well, Kerry, this has been really insightful. I had no idea that this was actually a thing, like companies doing wholesale water to different entities,
Yeah.
and the groundwater was such an important part of the whole system. I really had no idea. I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking about it. Is there, if I would ask you, what you would recommend to people to mm, just take home with, right? So that they can do a better job of keeping our water supply. What would that be?
Stay aware of what's going on, especially at the state level, as far as water's concerned. The future water supply is a big concern, even for the larger organizations and municipalities. And so be aware and make sure that you're standing up for your rights and make sure that you're in a position where you're always going to have plenty of clean, safe, affordable drinking water.
Thank you so much, Kerry. If everyone wants to learn more about the Canyon Regional Water Authority and related entities, how can they find more information?
They can look at our website, or they can call us. I'll be glad to talk to anybody who would like to hear more information. Our main phone number is 830-609-0543.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much, Kerry. I'll put that in the show notes as well as a website so people can find you. And again, I really appreciate you coming on the show,
It
and
was
we'll
my
see you.
pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.